agenda?
No.
Thank you. Get a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated. Councillor Grace, second, please. Councillor Ventimiglia, call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. And we'll move right into 2021-2025 Sewer Operating and Capital Financial Plan. Deputy Finance Officer's report is attached, and I will pass it over to Marcus.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can everybody hear me all right? Today, staff will be presenting the 2021 to 2025 Sewer Operating and Capital Financial Plan. Overall, we are proposing a 4% rate increase to maintain our transfers to the Sewer Capital Reserve. At the conclusion of budget deliberations for 2020, Council directed staff to prepare a financial plan process policy, which was approved on February 24th, 2020, and established a baseline budget. The baseline budget reflects the resources required to provide the same level of service in the current year before any new priorities or funding requests. Base budget expenditures are identified as core to the provisions of service to the town of Oliver. Quoting the policy, salaries and benefits, utilities, fuel, insurance, service contracts, and fleet maintenance are all considered base expenditures and are not to be reviewed by council on an annual basis, end quote. Staff have identified these base budget expenditures by highlighting the account number in orange. That being said, and given this is a transition year to the new budget policy, staff have not highlighted all budget line items that could potentially be considered part of the baseline budget. We left line items such as materials and supplies unhighlighted to facilitate the transition and promote discussion if council chooses to do so. Also in 2020, council approved COVID-19 financial relief measures to offset the financial impacts to residents. For sewer, council approved a 50% reduction in sewer user fee rates for the first quarter billings of 2020. Therefore, user fees collected in 2020 are compared to 2019. Therefore, user fees collected in 2020 as compared to 2019 will be reduced. This should result in a lower than anticipated transfer to sewer capital reserve in 2020. The 2021 sewer budget has no change in service levels. Overall, operating expenditures are $42,000 or 4.7% higher than 2020 when removing amortization and reserve transfers. Staff is proposing sewer rates to increase 4%. Administration costs increased $15,000 primarily due to contracted salary increases. The operations budget decreased $3,000 primarily due to a reduction in staff training. The collection system only decreased $2,000 in total and remains consistent with the 2020 budget. Treatment disposal increased $32,000 due to various increases for routine maintenance and cleaning. The transfer to sewer capital reserve increased $98,000. Most of this was due to the COVID-19 relief measures put in place in 2020. The 5-year capital budget is $3.9 million. The projected December 31st, 2020 sewer capital reserve balance is $1.6 million. Currently, the sewer capital reserve has insufficient funds to pay for capital works beyond 2021, and debt financing will need to be considered. The Director of Operations has included a detailed analysis and justification for each sewer project within the budget highlights attached to this report. Options for council are 1, that council adopt the 2021 to 2025 sewer operating and capital financial plan as presented with a 4% rate increase and that staff prepare the necessary bylaws. Or 2, that council provides further direction to staff for the 2021-2025 sewer operating and capital financial plan. It is staff's recommendation that council adopt the 2021-2025 sewer operating and capital financial plan as presented with a 4% rate increase and that staff prepare the necessary bylaws. With that, I will open the budget deliberation process to council and request that we start with the 2021 sewer operating budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Since nobody's got their hand up, I will start the conversation. I think we should have a little bit of a good discussion about what base budget and what the expectations around base budget are. And I'll start that conversation. My experience with a base budget is that a base budget, now I acknowledge that you said that we're working to put together and finalize our base budget, so that makes sense to me that this would be the last year there would be any changes. But moving forward, my expectation, and just wanting to confirm that that's your expectation as well, is the only things that would change in a base budget without a budget request would be things like wages and benefits that are attached to a CUPE contract, which council has already approved and committed ourselves to. Utilities would be another area that we have no control over, and there could be increases there. But pretty much everything else in the base budget, whether it's training or materials or any type of other allocations, the line items would maintain and would be the same next year when we come back here, and any increases or adjustments in those lines would be a request by staff with determining whether it's an ongoing request or a one-time request, indicating ongoing that there would be an increase to the base budget ongoing. A one-time is that request would be there for that particular year and not be there in the following year, which would give council the opportunity to identify any increases in the base budget before them being added in there. So they would all come as a request, and they would have to be approved before they would be put into the base budget. Would that be your expectation? Is that what you think is the a base budget?
Yes. What we were also thinking was presenting the budget in a different way, maybe by category, because things change. For example, for pump, let's say a pump needs to be refurbished. And usually what Sean does is that's on a cycle. Every 2 years or so, a pump needs to be refurbished, and it goes from different pump stations. And so in that case, we could make a category and maybe call it pump stations and lump that all the pump stations into one. And if that category itself is above the threshold of the base budget, then it could be discussed, as opposed to going by account by account.
No, I would agree with you as well. I think there's, particularly in the sewer and the water, there seems to be materials and power and labor for every location, and I'm not sure that's the most efficient way to do it. And if you're going to roll that up, but still charge your expenses where they're being actually spent, so that there is always the opportunity to understand where those expenses are going and potentially why expenses are increasing in one lift station than another lift station. That's you know, I've dealt with that before. I think that's a very efficient way to do it. Again, as long as those numbers, those budget numbers, once we set the final base budget this year, it comes back exactly that way next year, unless council wants to, you know, and has the discretion to do a review of the base budget at any time, or ask for reductions or approve increases. So that would be my thinking. It sounds like we're on the same page here and moving toward that, but we're not quite there this year, because there's even the ones that you've highlighted in here. A lot of those, pretty much all of them, have had changes of a few dollars to a few $1,000s,
Yes.
which wouldn't, to me, be what we're looking for in what I'm thinking a base budget is. Oh, Councillor Mattis?
Just to follow up on that, I like having the line by line as we currently do, but at the same time, when you look, it is rolled up as well. You know, as an example, on page 9, you know, your administration operating expenses, they're broken out line by line, which is great. And it's certainly, you know, I believe that our policies allow staff to move things within a function and without any input from council. But if you're moving things from one area to another, then that requires input of council. So where it's rolled up into total administration, that's where I would expect the numbers to match year over year. When those numbers don't match, then that's when the budget request would come in. on individual line items with an explanation for the reasons why. So we're kind of on the same page as the mayor's saying, in terms of that you already have the rolled up numbers into the main number.
Correct.
And within that, the numbers really, they don't matter a heck of a lot to us as long as the bottom line remains the same. And maybe that is for the whole budget. When we look at the bottom line of the budget, we could even go that far to say, if the budget last year was 3.2 million and the budget this year is 3.2 million, then we're good. You know, if you have change requests within that, then we need to know what you're requiring to go up from that point.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page, yeah.
Yes, I would agree. I think we're moving into the right direction and nailing it down this year, understanding that next year the base budget will be exactly what the base budget was approved this year is, with some things that we have no control over, but very few things actually. Wages, benefits, and utilities are pretty much the only three things that can increase. Utilities we have no control over, but wages we do through QP contracts and things like that.
I agree.
Thanks, Marcus. I personally don't have any questions on the way the budget is laid out and the numbers that are there in the budget. There is some changes to a few things. Maybe that was in water mainly. I guess I would ask the Director of Operations to maybe go through. I mean, the budget is pretty much the same. There hasn't been much of an increase. If you look at the total at the bottom, it's been pretty minimal. Lots of stuff has been moved around. And if there's any highlights in there, other than what you've highlighted as a brief at the start of the discussion, it'd be good to hear about those.
Your Worship?
Councillor Mattis?
I'm looking at the bottom line on page 12, and 2020 budget is 1.2 million for expenses. This year's budget is 1.4 million. I see that as a pretty significant difference, that they're not the same at all, or even close. That's a 10% increase in expenses.
True. Some of those include an increase in the surplus going to reserve. So it'd just be good to understand why those increases are there. I mean, we are establishing a base budget, so we should go through it fairly thorough this year. Next year, we won't need to go through it as thorough because the base budget will be the base budget. That's probably where the biggest, Councillor Mattis, that's probably where the biggest difference is right there.
It's half the difference, 70,000.
Yeah, and that was due to the COVID measures you guys put in place for 2020 and the reduction of user fees. But yeah, we can go through any line items you'd like to.
Now, a different question would be, under the recovery money that was discussed at council last night, would some of this reduction fall under that? Would we be able to claim that back from the province?
Potentially, yes. We don't have enough information yet to know where we can allocate those funds, but the answer to that question is potentially yes.
Okay. So I guess for me, the revenue side is easily explained due to the COVID, but the the expense side is probably where the questions come up, you know? And, I mean, I don't want to beat it up line by line, but maybe on page 9 of 44, we could get an explanation what has occurred to licenses and dues.
Yeah, I'm just going to scroll down to that. This now, licenses and dues includes the sandy dump fees that are $150 a month. So that's the new sandy dump that was finished this fall. There are monthly fees associated with the sandy dump of $150, and that is represents an $1,800 increase in that line item.
Perfect.
It's also, that's offset by the revenue. So we projected a $2,000. It'll likely be more than that. We're just being conservative, but we're projecting for the first year of operation that it'll be about $2,000 in revenues. Likely will be much higher than that.
Okay. So under the scenario the mayor was talking about, would that fall in, I mean, it's explained by the revenue side, obviously, but would that fall into a change request next year? Because it's
That
$1,000
would,
difference?
yes, yeah.
So,
In my opinion, that would, yeah.
okay. Now, just a clarification as well, had an earlier discussion with the mayor. When we talk about $1,000, he was thinking that it was $1,000 in the whole budget, as opposed to $1,000 per category or line. What would your understanding be?
I guess the best way to go about that would be a percentage of the baseline budget that was established. So if there was, let's say, a 5% or 10% change in that line item or category, then it would be looked at by council. That's the best way I could see it going about doing that. Doug, is that?
It's a way.
Yeah.
The way that I manage my base budget and where I come from when I talk about a base budget is there's always some expectation that there's some surplus in your base budget. So incremental increases of $500. I tried that actually the first time I was responsible for my budget and got told that was an interesting way to, because I had probably $30,000 increase at a $500 and $800 and $1,000 at a time, but even in a $6 million budget I had at that time, it was $1,000, period. And small increases, there's always ebb and flows in operational budgets, which you will expend less here and expend more there. So basically there was almost no increase to the operational budget. The expectation was not to come forward with a small $1,000 increment. We were given a $1,000 increment in our whole base budget, which was basically nothing in that size of a budget, which gave council the ability to approve all increases in the budget and also gave staff the onus to operate as efficiently as possible, because there's an expectation that you are going to have some surplus. And if I'm looking at this correctly, there is a $248,000 surplus within the base budget, is under excess surplus to go to reserve.
Correct.
Yeah, so there's quite a surplus in there, and I don't think that, personally, I don't think it's. I've tried operating in a zero-based budget before, and it's just not reasonable. You just can't do it. But that's your budget, and you have an operation responsibility to operate within that budget. So $1,000, I think, is a reasonable threshold, and everything else, personally, I think, should be made as a request to that budget, and it should be a fairly significant request. $5,000, $6,000, $3,000, not just $500, $400. So I would expect that we wouldn't be getting, 25 requests for $500 each type of thing.
So, Mayor, just
Yes.
so I'm on the same page with you, is that per line item, per account? The $1,000 threshold, if it's above the $1,000 per account, then it would have to be presented to council, and then could you just explain the $1,000 threshold?
Well, it was
Is
in,
it based on
like,
account number?
It should be $1,000 in the sewer budget.
Period. Oh,
Period.
the entire, okay.
Right.
I got you. Okay.
$1,000 in the water budget.
Yes.
When you go to general budget, you're going to have different categories in your admin budget, so that it could be $1,000 within each of those different budgets within the general budget. But when you're talking sewer, it's $1,000 discretionary by staff to ask for an increase. Everything else above that, other than wages, utilities, which we have no control over, or wages and benefits, which council has already approved an increase as per the CUPE contract, those just happen automatically. And there's an understanding and expectation that that's going to happen. But everything else, $1,000, everything above that comes as a request.
And things like materials and supplies that usually go up every year, especially with the pumps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're finding, we've even noticed this year, there's a lot of supplies have gone up like 6%. And a lot of, it just depends what you're ordering. If you're ordering from the States, depending on our dollars, a lot of things come out of the States. It's hard to budget for that. It's, for some of it.
No, I understand that
So that
completely.
would just, and to go back to the base budget, and I'm starting to understand where you're coming from now. But like some years, and we've discussed this before, are some maintenance is a little heavier than other years. Some pumps are larger. If it's a larger pump or more horsepower, and for refurbishing it, it costs more than another one. So one year could be $10,000 to do this refurbishing in this pump, but it's going to be another $3,000 for this pump. So that would come forward to you guys as an extra.
Yeah, that would come forward to council, and it would be a very easy justification on your part that there's been an increase in materials cost. Council sees that, or we're doing this job this year. One of the things that you don't want to see in your base budget, and that's why you look at whether it's a one-time or ongoing, a lot of activities you don't do every year. And you may
No.
have a large operational task to do, one where you're cleaning out a chamber that you do every 2 or 3 years. So that would be a one-time request then, as opposed to increasing your base budget ongoing when you're only doing that activity every 2 or 3 years. Councillor Mattis?
The other option would be to develop a operational reserve, so to speak, so that if you have something that you're cleaning out every 3 years that costs $60,000, the budget every year is $20,000. And every third year, you have the $60,000 that's required to do the job. So similarly with the pumps, if one year we spend $150,000 and the next year $50,000 refurbishing pumps, on average, we spend $100,000. Therefore, our budget should be $100,000 a year. If we don't spend it on those particular items, it would go into an operational reserve, similar to our snow budget, where we put money in the snow budget for the years when we have lots, and take it out, or put it in when we have little and take it out when we have lots. You know, even though it fluctuates, it's a quantifiable fluctuation in terms of that you can budget it longer term on an average number, because we know that these pumps require replacement or refurbishing every X number of years, and we can budget accordingly.
Yeah, just an example to follow up with Councillor Mattis, in the treatment disposal section, we are planning on cleaning the equalization basins, the two that are located at Public Works, started the treatment process. And so that's why the influent facility labor and materials are a lot higher than previous years.
What page are you on?
Well, my page says 10 of 18 on the iPad.
I think it's 11 on our
Oh, okay.
sheets.
And that would be something that we do I believe every 3 years. And, yeah, and it just happens to be this year.
So in that particular case, maybe, you know, if last year's budget was 360 and the difference is 30,000 between last year and this year, maybe the budget should be 370 every year. And some of that money's put into reserve. The pumps is pretty much, it fluctuates from one pump or another pump year by year, but overall, the number's pretty much the same every year. We just do different pumps.
Yeah, they're
In that
close.
sense, so that budget's quite easy.
Yeah, and the water budget, we're finding, we've been really good on keeping up on maintenance on equipment, and the guys have done a great job over the years, and we're finding that we can actually stretch some of the years out on the pump refurbishing, and because it may be overkill too, so we're looking at that and stretching out. Maybe I have to sit down with our guys and come up with a better schedule and try to offset, okay, here are all the pumps at each location, here's the cycle. We'll come up with something like that internally.
Well, either that or you keep doing what you're doing, and then if you find that your reserve is getting too large, then it's a situation where you come to our finance staff and say, hey, this reserve is larger than what we require. We need to do a transfer from that to general reserves, or to the sewer reserve, or the water reserve, whatever the case may be. You know, we'll, much the same as we've done with the equipment reserve in the past, when it has gotten too large, we've drawn it down into general reserves, that sort of a thing. You know, I wouldn't want you to get so tight that you end up short in a particular year.
Yeah.
We don't want to have that situation either. You know, the whole purpose of this is, at the end of the day, to drive some money for reserves. You know, the councilors aren't here, but they used to call it slush or whatever, and I know it's a word that everyone hates to hear, but we'll just call it reserve planning as opposed to that. There's always extra in every budget, we know that, and that's what drives the reserves. That's not a problem, we don't want to eliminate that. We just want to manage it.
Okay.
Make sense?
No, totally, and I think the budget that's in front of us today, if I look at where most of the increases are, they're just about all in labor. So I'm sure I'm assuming those are all being driven by CUPE. You've had a few reductions in different areas. I'm quite happy with that this could be our base budget, and moving forward, we would move forward with the $1,000. And anything above that, except for wages, like I said, and utilities, there is some utilities in here, I believe, correct?
Correct.
Or are they there are some. Those things, you know, you would get an increase based mainly on Fortis, because everything in the sewer, I'm assuming, is electrical. We don't have any natural gas utility and?
No.
No. So those would be the things that we would expect an increase in annually, and anything else would just be a budget request for council to look at the justification and approve or not approve.
And it would probably make sense to break out those two items as their own subcategory. You know, rather than putting ground maintenance labor in with ground maintenance materials on the sewer operating fund, it should be broken out as labor, so that we can see the difference clearly year over year, rather than having.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah.
With the categories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, shuffle the categories slightly.
What does the rest of council think? I don't want to monopolize the conversation. Councillor Ventimiglia?
I have a question on a totally different train of thought, zooming way back out, and I'm
Could
not.
I ask you to talk into your mic, please?
I even pulled it right up. So zooming out, in the 2021 budget highlights, the last bullet point, just at the bottom there, currently the sewer capital reserve has insufficient funds to pay for capital works beyond 2021, and debt financing will need to be considered. Is that something we should be concerned about?
No, that's something that year over year, debt financing in the sewer capital budget is usually presented, because the reserve fund isn't as robust as the water reserve. And if we decide to go forward with all the proposed capital works in the budget, then to keep the reserve balance at a reasonable level, debt financing would have to be considered for the future years. And it's not something we have done to date, because a lot of those projects don't end up going through, or we have sufficient funds to cover them. So as of to date, we have not taken out any debt financing for sewer capital. But just for the budget process, we do put it in there just so the reserve balances are at a sufficient level. So in practice, it hasn't come to fruition where we actually had to take out debt, at least in
How
the,
we've overcome it is we move things out of the capital budget into the future. We don't do it all at once and go into debt. We do it, we just move it further out.
Right, we just
It
keep
gets done
pushing things.
eventually, but just not.
Eventually. Oh, the word eventually.
Well,
No, but I'm just,
That's how it
so,
works.
so then I'm wondering though, is that something that we should be doing, paying more attention to building up that reserve? Or is the way that we
think,
do it kind of
I-
just the way to do it?
yeah, looking back, I think it's been fine the way we've been doing things. And it's something you can consider. You could consider making it a more robust reserve. It would require higher user fees. However, as of today, it's been, in practice, it's been fine so far, yeah.
we also have to consider the capacity of Public Works to do the projects and have things, getting it all done. If we did all of these projects in 1 year, the whole town would be torn up. So that's why we tend to move things off.
Just one sec, Councillor Grace. Councillor Schwarzenberger?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, just looking at the reserves projection at the, before you went to the capital projects list, I mean, I can see here that, you're drawing down the reserves in 2021 and 2022, basically down to where there's almost nothing left. And then 2023, 2024, and 2025, basically all the big projects are financed out of borrowing, and you're building the reserve back up again to get to 800,000 at the end of 2025. Is that correct?
Correct.
So I guess the discussion is, do you borrow all this money so that you can end up with 800,000 in your reserve, or do you borrow less and end up with a smaller amount in your reserve?
Right, it's a balancing act, yeah.
Yeah. So that's up to council in the next few years to decide if we should borrow more or take more out of reserves.
How critical is the project?
Yeah. And how critical is the project, obviously, yes.
Councillor Grace?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I guess my question then is, are we in this position now? Are we facing a backlog of projects? Have we been carrying forward too many projects? Or is this just an issue of aging infrastructure and things are all coming up now?
Director of Operations can answer that for you.
Well, we're continuously, things pop up out of the blue. And like this year, we had a bunch of little things in our capital reserves or capital projects. Some of these projects will likely get bumped. They're projects to improve the system. Some of it is aging infrastructure that will need to be done. And we never know exactly what year that the infrastructure is going to fail. And the unfortunate part for me when I'm trying to budget for these projects is I'm trying to budget, trying to figure out what we're going to do in the future, although in 3 different budgets, and they all can influence the other. So if we're going to redo a road, if I come to you in the general budget deliberations and saying, and we move a road out there and go, we're not going to do this road for 2 or 3 years, but it was passed in the water and sewer, and it's a difficult juggling act on my end. I'm trying to predict what is going to get approved. And what I'm planning on trying to do this year, now that we've got most of our infrastructure inputted, is come to council and let them know where the real critical areas are with our aging infrastructure. And we're close to doing that now with our asset management. So again, going back to your original question, yeah, we do push things out. There's things that can get pushed out, and we do this every year. And then there's things that come out of the blue that we didn't foresee and go, well, we need to do that. So it's a mix of everything, right?
Yeah, and I guess that's just something council needs to be mindful of if we're at a point now where we're going to start accruing debt because so many things have been pushed forward, and now we're at a point where we're, hitting a point where some of these issues are critical and need to be taken care of now. But I think it seems like you've done a good job of letting us know, like in the capital projects, for example, if there's, like with Kootenai Street sewer upgrades, that's also connected to Kootenai Street, just so that we can be aware that those all have to work in conjunction with each other.
Yeah, and we're always, the words of the day are asset management, really, for all municipalities, but we've always been doing that. We've always been looking at the infrastructure underneath. And if we're thinking of even considering to redo a road, we're looking at the water and sewer and going, no sense building a nice, or beautifying a road or building a nice road if your infrastructure is going to fail in 10 years, right? So.
Thank you.
I guess there's a couple other little pieces to that puzzle as well, and one of them is the amount of carryovers or the workload and how much is getting done in a given year and how much is having to be carried over into the next year. And the other strategy, which I see there has been some discussion in the capital, is about doing some design work ahead of time, which puts us in the place of shovel-ready projects, which gives us the opportunity to apply for grant funding, which is another way to avoid borrowing or using our reserves. And there is money out there for water and sewer in grant funding. We talked about that with the Gallagher Lake siphon, that we're going to have to borrow for that. But one of the challenges we have with that, there is no category that project fits into, but there is definitely categories for water and sewer that we should be applying for grant funding on certain projects, especially big nugget projects, and taking advantage of that money.
Yeah, we were trying to be a little proactive to have some things closer to being shelf ready, and that's what we started last year and what we're trying to do this year as well. To get ready for the grants, if a grant is available at the time.
Councillor Mattis?
I do support that pre-work for the shovel ready, but my concern is I continually see that we're spending money on shovel ready. For example, on the Kootenai Street sewer upgrades, require $20,000 for design in 2021 on page 15. When I read the report there, it says, looking to do a moderate fix, we want to ensure that our infrastructure is in decent, good shape, or if we need to look at upgrading some portions of the sewer system, keeping the integrity. But that would, and we require $20,000 for design in 2021. Well, if we don't know what shape our system is in yet, or if we're needing to look at upgrading some portion, what are we designing? Like, why are we needing 20, in that particular case, why are we, and then it seems that we do this small $20,000 investment for design work, or maybe something here, I'm not exactly sure what we're buying. And then when it comes time to do the actual project, then we look at the budget for that, and then there's another $150,000 in engineering. And I'm confused about what we're buying $15,000 and $20,000 at a time.
Okay, well, I'll try to explain it, because it is referring to the street itself as well. So we know the infrastructure in Kootenai Street is aging, and I could give you more details. But I wouldn't carry forward with the design on Kootenai Street unless it was passed in the other two budgets. Doesn't make sense. So if council decides to switch things and move some projects around in either budget, they all affect each other, right? So when it comes to the roads and the infrastructure underneath, so that 20K would cover part of the design for the consultants, engineers, which involves when they go out and design a road, there's a lot of surveying that's involved. There's a lot of design work. There's back and forth with even us, staff and engineers. There's drawings and, concept drawings to start with. Like it goes back. So there is it does take some money to design these projects. I don't know if I answered your question fully, but
Well, I'm just suggesting in this case, I don't think $20,000 gets us shovel-ready.
no, it just covers the sewer portion. So when we do a project, like Earl
There's
Crescent,
one in water. Just maybe explain that, Sean. Like there's a sewer component here, there's a budget line in the water, and there's also would be
That's
a
correct.
paving one or a street one in the general, and all three of those would have to get a check mark before it would trigger this being spent.
That's right, because the surveying and some of the work overlaps. When I get an invoice from the engineers, I have to go through, and they give me, itemized to a point, what they've done, and I have to break that invoice into the 3 different budgets, right? So I need money in each budget to do the work, because it's not just, okay, we're just going to replace the sewer. Well, we're going to replace the sewer, we may have to relocate it. There's some engineering that goes into it. It's going to be different materials. There's a number of factors, right? So, but it's true that unless like a road's being done and it's check marked and passed in all 3 budgets, unless it's check marked in all 3 budgets, we're not going to proceed to do the design work on it. You'll have to wait until it is approved in all 3 budgets. It's just the way we budget, and this is where it's difficult for me. And I've expressed this to finance. I had to go and start the general budget before I even started these. To me, the general budget always seems to be the one that dictates the other 2 when it comes to these types of projects. If I'm replacing pumps and stuff, that's no problem, that's easy in the water and sewer budget. But if we're doing a road, redoing a road, that's a whole different story.
So is it a situation where we should be today approving the operations side of the budget and waiting on the capital side of the budget until all 3 elements can be discussed at once? And I again, to go back to the beginning, I look in, and I'm jumping ahead here. Kootenai Street sewer upgrades, $20,000, which for the engineering. And when I go into the water budget, Kootenai Street services upgrade, when I look at the description, Kootenai Street is in the budget for upgrading the surface and some infrastructure, and it would be good if we improve some of the underground infrastructure, which would be mostly water services. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Yeah, the water main line on Kootenai, for the most part, is in half decent shape. So
Okay.
it's the services
So
going to each property.
I'm puzzled, if it's mostly water, why are we asking for 20,000 engineering and sewer and 14,000 engineering and water? If it's mostly water.
No, it's the sewer is going to be a larger cost to the project. We're replacing the main lines in the sewer and
Well,
manholes.
I'm just going by the descriptions that you've given. You're the,
It's just a percentage of the overall dollar figure of what we estimate it would cost to replace that infrastructure. So we'll take a certain percentage and go, if it's going to be $395,000, take a certain percentage, that's $20,000 for design work. It's rough, but it's not an exact science. And then in the sewer for Kootenai,
over the years, you can almost say it's exactly 10%. It seems engineering, no matter what the size of the project is, the engineering's 10%. It's just the way it is.
so
It's a little frustrating, but
the water is about $100,000 less to do. So that's, the design work reflects that.
okay.
Councillor Grace, you had a question?
Sean answered my question.
Okay. Councillor Ventimiglia.
Yeah, I started thinking I was going to ask one question. Now I'm not really sure, but if there's a project that is exactly what you just described, a small amount in multiple budgets, but all need to be passed in order to make the project go forward, I was going to start by asking, is there a way, if it's not already done, to annotate that so that we know that this is 20,000 of an $85,000 project or something, and we know that we should be looking also in water and also in general, because that would make, I think, it easier, or at least we would have more information when making the $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 decisions that don't seem like very large ones. We'd know that in the end, that whole thing's going to cost us $120,000 this year, or whatever it is. And that's maybe an easier way to pick and choose which ones are in and which ones are out when we're looking at it piece by piece. So that was my original thought. And then, as I've heard the conversation go on, I kind of almost am on the same page as Councillor Mattis. Like, is that something that we shouldn't even be finalizing right now until we've finalized the main capital budget? Because we may get there and realize like this really doesn't fit. No matter how we make it work, it's not going to be a priority this year. But if we've already allocated 20 and 20, those are already included in an approved budget somewhere, and they're not going to be used.
Just to follow up, if they're not used, where do they flow back to? Do they go into the capital reserves, or do they go into the general?
Projects in this, for example, in the sewer capital, if they are not used, essentially it would flow into the sewer capital reserve.
Okay.
Which is not a bad thing. It's just that we're making decisions perhaps without having all of the information that we need. It's not a bad thing that it goes into the reserves, and if we could fit it in, it's okay, but it just, we may be not making the most informed decisions along the way.
Can I answer?
Sure, Director.
And I'm just thinking, and I don't disagree with Councillor Mattis at all on this. And maybe when it comes to these road projects where you're looking at the various types of infrastructure, maybe just those projects could be put on hold. But the other ones that aren't related to roads or water, and if it's just the sewer items and we have to replace things and order pumps, maybe those can get passed. I don't know if there's a way of doing that or not.
I was going to say, Director, I would agree with you. If it's a project that's sewer, it's a sewer project and being funded out of the sewer reserve, then there's no reason why we can't look at those today. The other thing that I look at here is, if we pass all three of those projects, that's a significant amount of work compared to just one of those projects. I'm not sure in a capacity whether there's even capacity to do all three of those projects in a year. So that's another consideration. I do like the idea where this discussion is going, that those type of projects that have funding from multiple, from water, sewer, and roads in particular, probably should be considered maybe a general budget. I'm not sure if there's a precedent to do that, or if we can just ask for that to be done, but that would make a lot more sense at that time, personally. Councillor Mattis?
At the end of the day, it won't really matter because, as Mr. Lieber said, it'll flow back into the reserve. So, it's a situation where we could approve all of our capital budget in sewer today. When we get to the general budget and we say, no, we're not doing that particular road, then all that means is that the item in sewer will flow back into the reserve for the year that we actually need and do the project. So it really comes down to today for the sewer and even possibly a lot of the water projects that we just approve the budget. And then when we go into the general budget, that's where we need to be a little more selective, because those items will drive whether the items actually get done here or whether they go back into the reserve for another year.
Just one sec, Councillor Grace. Councillor Ventimiglia, and then Councillor Grace.
And if that's the way that we do it, that's not a problem. Clearly, we've done it like that for a really long time. But I do think that it would help us to make more informed decisions, knowing that the decision that we're making is one of three parts, or one of two parts, or one of four, like whatever it is, knowing that it's part of a bigger picture and it's not going to happen unless all of the other pieces fall into place. Because this year I'll be more aware of it, but if we haven't been aware of it in the past, maybe we don't pass something in the general budget and then we see one of these smaller things come up again next year and go, oh, didn't Didn't we do that last year? Oh, no, we didn't do that last year because you didn't approve step 2 and 3, but, you know, if we didn't know that they were all part of a bigger picture, then you just don't know what you don't know.
And that's something we could identify in the presentation going forward.
It's a rollover from the previous.
Exactly, yeah.
Rollover or also, again, one part of the multiple part puzzle.
Councillor Grace?
I was basically going to say the same thing, so we'll just,
A good idea.
well done, yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Great minds. Your worship.
Yeah, it's a big room. I'm looking.
Yeah, no,
Need to make some noise.
yeah.
Director.
Little bells.
You know what, a lot of times, you know, I agree with the mayor about, you know, sometimes we lump in a bunch of projects and, you know, it's realistically, it may not be attainable, but I know that that's where we sit here and go, okay, well, we can move some of these. Some of them aren't critical, but we need to populate the 5-year capital plan and we need to replace infrastructure. So, yeah, like I mean, if there's specific projects where we're looking at 1 year and it's $2 million, it's like, that's not achievable. I know that it's going to move, but I've just kept them in there because of the previous 5-year capital plan and,
I was just listening to the conversation. I'm just wondering, usually what drives a lot of these projects, whether it be general water, sewer, is a master plan. And I don't know if we've done a master plan for a 5 or a 10-year master plan for all our capital works, because like you're quite right, they all do tie together, but I haven't seen one. Now, I'm fairly new around the table, but I mean, if that needs to be explained and shown, that how do these fit into your master plan?
well, we did
In my opinion.
We did do a sewer capital plan previous year and a water capital plan. And if you look on the long-term capital expenditure spreadsheet, you'll see the projects in future years where it says S1, S3, S4, S2. Those did come from that plan. It's, I think what we need to do now that we have a lot of our information for our capital assets, our asset management, we do need to come forward with a road capital one. And knowing that maybe we need to do this road, even though it's in better shape of this road, but we're doing it because the sewer is about to fail, right? And so I probably need to do that for council, and then we'll wrap our heads around it. We'll be in a better place next time we talk, next year.
It's always a good question, which is the priority, the sewer or the road? And what drives the project?
To me, if you were to ask me, it's generally the deep utilities that drive the project. You know, the surface of a road can be repaired or patched up. And generally our roads overall in our community are in decent shape. There's a couple that are bad, but other communities have more challenges than we do. We're pretty compact and we can keep on top of our roads, and we've done a decent job over the years. But right now, what we're looking at, there's a lot of sewer that needs to be replaced in the next 10 years. And so we got to get going on that, and I should be bringing a plan together for council hopefully this year.
Councillor Grace?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I think I really like the idea of having a master plan, but hopefully even this year when we get to general, because you know, we might, if we're looking at roads projects, we might not understand the urgency behind a sewer project that's connected to it. So hopefully you can be sharing that information when we get to that point.
Yeah, I have some information. I didn't send it to council, and maybe now I'm kind of kicking myself, but we did start that. Like, we've got some priorities, and we've already started the process, so it might be sooner rather than later. And it talks about, you know, Station Street, Kootenai, Okanagan streets, and some of these other streets, and it explains how old the infrastructure is for water and sewer and what shape it's in, basically. And some of them, it's a little more critical than others, for sure. So we just got to put that together a little bit better and then bring it forward to council.
It'll give us a good opportunity to plan ahead rather than being so reactive, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we've just recently have all the data now, and we're trying to do more with it in our lightship program. And actually, what I'm working with our Eng Tech is trying to produce even some reports from that program that we can show, here's where our infrastructure is at, you know, whether it's good, fair, or critical, that needs to be replaced, and give you guys a better idea.
Councillor Mattis?
Thank you, Worship. I never like to see a 4% rate increase, but I think on the basis of what we did this year with our sewer and water rates, that 4% is not an unreasonable request. So I'll throw it out for discussion that I will make the motion that council adopt the 2021 to 2025 sewer operating and capital financial plan as presented with a 4% rate increase, and that staff prepare the necessary bylaws. I'm not sure whether we should throw in there that this will now become the base budget.
Well, I think that's what we're establishing this year is the base budget. So,
Okay.
yes.
I think the policy probably says that already. So.
Yeah.
I'll second.
Second, Councillor Schwarzenberger. I just have one question on the capital. So if we approve, for example, the Kootenai Street sewer upgrade, we're also committing ourselves to $395,000 of 2022 budget, because the work that's going to be done, I'm assuming this work isn't going to get done in 2021, so we're, by effect approving this, we are approving or...
We're
True.
approving the design work, and
Okay.
I've noted in the highlights that it can be 2022 or later. So
Okay.
that, and that'll just depend on what we prioritize
Okay.
in our general capital and over the next year.
So we're not...
No, we're
We've
just,
got the design work. It's a project that we are approving because we feel it is something that needs to be done. It's an infrastructure asset management issue. And if we can afford to do it in 2022, we will,
it's
if no other
getting it,
priorities arise, we'll take it on at that time, but we're not committing ourselves to it, I guess, so to speak.
it's just getting it closer to
Okay.
the goal line, and then if any grants are available, then we can submit and be ready for it.
Thank you. Councillor Grace?
Thank you, Your Worship. I know I ask this all the time, but just to put it into context, can you give me an idea what a per household increase would be with the 4%?
No.
Best answer of the day.
Doug, the CFO just advised me about $10.
Okay, thank you. That's palatable.
Slow motion for effect.
$10 per year annually?
Yeah, annually, yes.
Annually,
Yeah.
okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I will ask the question. Those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. That takes care of sewer. And we will move to water, 2021-2025 Water Operating and Capital Financial Plan. I'll pass this over to the Deputy Finance Officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Today's staff will be presenting the 2021 to 2025 Water Operating and Capital Financial Plan. Overall, we are proposing a 4% rate increase for 2021 to maintain our transfers to the Water Capital Reserve. At the conclusion of the budget deliberations for 2020, Council directed staff to prepare a financial plan process policy, which was approved on February 24th, 2020, and established a baseline budget. The baseline budget sorry. The baseline policy, which was a budget, reflects the, I apologize, give me 1 second.
No worries.
Reflects the resources required to provide the same level of service in the current year before budget reflects the resources, sorry. Base budget expenditures are identified as core to the provisions of the service to the town of Oliver. Quoting the policy, salaries and benefits, utilities, fuel, insurance, service contracts, and fleet maintenance are all considered base expenditures and are not to be reviewed by council on an annual basis, end quote. Staff have identified these base budget expenditures by highlighting the account number in orange. That being said, and given this is a transition year to the new budget policy, staff have not highlighted all baseline items that could potentially be considered part of the baseline budget. We left line items such as materials and supplies unhighlighted to facilitate the transition and promote discussion if council chooses to do so. In 2020, council approved COVID-19 financial relief measures to offset the financial impacts for residents. For water, council approved a 50% reduction in water user fee rates for the first quarter billings of 2020, as well as a 0% increase in rates for the year. Therefore, user fees collected in 2020 as compared to 2019 will be reduced. This should result in a lower than anticipated transfer to the Water Capital Reserve in 2020. In 2017, during budget deliberations, council adopted the following resolution: that council direct staff to implement an annual Canal Gallagher siphon rehabilitation increase over and above any operational rate increases on water user rates and water tax rate bylaws over the next 5 years, due to intimate repairs required to the town's irrigation canal as follows: 2017, 3%, 2018, 3%, 19, 2%, 20, 2%, and 2021, 2%. The increase to the water rates were utilized to fund the pending repairs to the irrigation canal, and the 2% increase for the 2021 from this 2017 resolution is embedded into the proposed 4% increase for 2021. The increase in water rates has resulted in the Water Capital Reserve projected balance of $2 million at the end of 2020. Utility rates are increasing 4%, 2% increase due to the escalating costs of operations, and 2% capital fund envelope increase for the Gallagher siphon, which was the 2017 council resolution I just discussed. Total operating expenditures, excluding reserve transfers and amortization, have decreased $59,000 or 2%. Water administration expenditures are only up $2,000 or 0.3% in total and remains consistent with the 2020 budget. Water purification and treatment expenditures are up $18,000 or 35%. This is mainly due to necessary safety upgrades to the water chlorination system for 2021. Service of supply expenditures are down by half. This was due to an upgrade done to the reservoir communication system in 2020. Transmission and distribution expenditures are down $25,000 or 3.9% and remains consistent with the 2020 budget. Pumping house expenditures are down $29,000 or 7.7%, as most of the power utility expenditure budgets were reduced slightly to bring them more in line with actual expenditures from 2020 and 2019. Pump maintenance expenditures are down $22,000 or 14%, as there are more pumps being refurbished in 2020. Transfer to capital reserve, $295,000 for Gallagher Siphon Project, represents the rate increases from 2017 to 2021. The balance of the transfer to capital reserve represents the net surplus of water operations. The 2021 to 2025 capital budget outlines projects totaling $13.9 million. The highest priority project that is included in the budget is the Gallagher Lake siphon repair. The $11.5 million gross cost of the project will be offset by a $5 million grant from the provincial government, with the remaining costs funded by borrowing. The remaining $4.5 million in capital projects for 2021 to 2025 will be funded out of the Water Capital Reserve, which is projected to have a healthy balance of $2 million at the end of 2020. The Director of Operations has included a detailed analysis and justification of each water project within the budget, highlights attached to this report. Options for council are to, one, that council adopts the 2021 to 2025 water operations and capital financial plan as presented with a 4% rate increase, and that staff prepare the necessary bylaw, or two, that council provides further direction to staff for the 2021 to 2025 water operations and capital financial plan. It is staff's recommendation that council adopt the 2021 to 2025 water operations and capital financial plan as presented with a 4% rate increase, and that staff prepare the necessary bylaws. With that, I will open up the budget deliberation process to council and request that we start with the 2021 water operating budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Councillor Michelle, I'll just give you an update on what we talked about in the sewer, just as far as what a base budget is. You'll see in the operating budget here, there are a number of line items that aren't highlighted. So after our discussion today, as we did in the sewer, what we agree on will become the operating base budget moving forward. Staff will be allowed to bring forward a $1,000 increase to that base budget at their discretion. Any other increases will have to come forward as a budget request, providing a justification. The only things that will change in there that we really have no control over are increases due to QP wages, utility costs, etc. When a budget item comes forward from staff, it'll have to identify whether it's an ongoing increase or a one-time increase. That was the
Per line item? No. Or $1,000?
total.
Total.
Yeah.
So anything over that,
Has to come forward to council for approval.
basically everything? Yep. So, yeah, it's kind of, so why are you going in that direction? Because everything's going to come to council. I mean, I can't imagine in an entire water budget or sewer budget, you're not going to have more than a $1,000 increase.
Could I ask that you please use your mic?
Sorry,
We are online.
you're on, we're online.
Well, the expectation, Councillor Michelle, is there is surplus in the water budget, just as there is in the sewer budget, so we shouldn't be nickel and dimed. Council shouldn't be asked for $50, $100, $500. They should be more significant increases in materials and supplies or contract costs or those types of things, or maybe a one-off for a major project that is being done in that particular year might be a one-time increase that disappears in the following year. So that's, we shouldn't see multiple requests, little requests.
I don't think we ever have, Your Worship. I mean, we have the line items and there's a budget for, like, let's just pick a topic, let's say pump repair this year.
Yeah.
You know, we would have, last year it might have been 40,000, this year it might be 60, next year it might be 30. You know, so that means that item would only come up when it triggers a higher number, or I'm a little bit confused as to.
Yeah, it would only come up if there's a needed budget increase for the line item as far as pump maintenance goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So each one of these line items, so the question was at the start, is that total or per line item? So it's total, that,
The total at the bottom will stay the same. It will increase based on wages, and because of council will have approved a QP increase or utility costs, but everything else will come forward to council as a budget item. I'll give you an example of one. I only have one question on this here, and it's on page 32 of 44 under pump maintenance. There's a line item there for Mud Lake pump materials, which was $1,000 and now it's close to $20,000. Is that a one-time request, or is there some new equipment that's gone in there that's resulting in a significant increase in materials needed? So that, to me, is that a one-time request? Is that an ongoing request?
That's a pump refurbish, like that's part of the increase in that budget. There are some other little things like materials for drives and gears, and some minor building fixes. So, but the majority of that cost is because we're pulling a pump and refurbishing it from Mud Lake this year.
So would those costs be there next year?
No, not entirely, no.
So then that line item there, if we're looking at a base budget, would be there this year, but it would go away next year because it's not needed.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, when I budget, I look at the sections more than anything too. And when we're going through the year, like that whole section, you know, whether it's pump maintenance, and I think you alluded to that too, right? That category, you look at that category, and generally when we're doing pumps, like we're always pulling at least a pump from some pump house.
Councillor Mattis?
That goes back to, as we discussed earlier on before Councillor Michelle was here, that particular category probably needs an annual expense number, and it will create a surplus in some years and a deficit in others, but we know that pump repairs and maintenance on average cost us $150,000 a year. So that really becomes the baseline, so to speak, and then that would create a contingency fund for the years when we spend more than that because a particular pump costs more in a particular year in order to be refurbished. You missed that part of the discussion earlier on. So that particular one is probably one that needs a different look at in terms of a base budget.
Councillor Michelle?
So in other words, let me wrap my head around this, because if we're looking at the bottom line not moving by more than $1,000 or whatever, then there's no discussion, yet somebody from council might have a question on one section, and because the bottom line didn't move, then you can't really question it?
Council always has the discretion
I mean,
to ask a question about a base budget, but if the base budget does not change every year, it does eliminate the need to be reviewing the base budget in detail. You could still look at actuals and ask a question about that, but that is the base budget that we've decided is needed to maintain the existing service levels.
I don't have a problem with that, but I do have a problem with giving full discretion to staff without some oversight from council as to where within, the budget is huge. The water budget, the sewer budget, they're huge budgets, to where that money is being spent in that budget. So if the base budget doesn't change, then we don't really,
I think you need to speak into the mic a little more.
I'm as close as I can be.
The oversight is the management by council of the whole number, and we give the discretion and the management to staff to work within that number. You know, the whole budget is $3 million. We don't say, well, you can only buy 5 pencils this year because we only gave you 75 cents for pencils.
Well,
We say you've got $3 million to spend, get the job done. If you need to spend more in a particular area here and less in a particular area here, within the budget, as long as the bottom line matches the box that we've put them in, then anything beyond that becomes day-to-day management, which we shouldn't be involved in.
As long as that opportunity is still there to review something that we would be concerned about in the budget. I understand that there's a baseline budget and that's what you're trying to achieve, but we might notice something that, well, we don't want to spend that much money this year on that particular part of the budget. I mean, it's an overall picture. I mean,
Once you establish a base budget, I mean, like Councillor Mattis says, that's your box that's the box that staff have to work in. Council still has the discretion to do things like a base budget review. Maybe it happens at the beginning of a term of a new council, in the middle of the term of that council, or only happens once in the term of that council. But you have a base budget review, you look at your service levels. One thing that happens about having a base budget is anything that comes forward, you're asking the question, why do I need that? Why does staff need that budget increase? Is it to maintain a service level or increase that service level? So it gives council complete discretion when they're approving budget, why they're approving that budget. But there is always the opportunity to review a base budget.
Just a quick question, what has triggered this? Because, I mean, is it because we sit here for days and days and days discussing budgets? I've been here for 30 years, and it usually lasts about 3 hours. So I don't know what has triggered this fear of going over a budget once a year, where it takes you 4 or 5 hours to go over it. I don't understand.
This was, there's actually a policy that's been approved about it. This was a discussion at last year's budget to go in this direction. It gives council much more control over the budget. It gives staff some ability to work within that budget. It gives staff the responsibility to be efficient and stay within that budget. And it also gives council the real control to be able to determine what the service levels are every time a budget item comes forward. When you get a budget and all the line items are continually changing and you're looking at adjusting each one because of actuals, and taking a little bit away and taking some away here and adding more here, I'm not sure that you're being real efficient, or you're managing your budget as council at a governance level better. Councillor Mattis?
I would also suggest that within that, Councillor Michelle, that, I mean, if our base budget this year, for example, is $3 million, there's no reason that we can't look at next year based on actuals and whatever and say, this year's budget is $2.9 million. You're going to have to become more efficient, live without, this is all we can afford this particular year. The following year, we would go back to the $3 million baseline budget and take a look at that. And maybe in that year, we would have to say, well, now we have to actually spend 3.1. But again, the year after that, we would be back at the $3 million starting point. And we would always work off of that starting point each year. Part of this also allows council, by defining the box each year, to hopefully drive efficiencies. The way we do things now, there's really no opportunity for council to drive efficiency except to say, cut the budget. You know, by saying, here's your annual limit, it forces staff to drive efficiency, to say, I have to live within this box. How do I do that? How can we do this better? So it becomes staff's job instead of council's job.
Councillor Ventimiglia?
Just a question that I might have missed somewhere along the line, but Councillor Mattis's comments just made me think about it. So if we create a baseline budget, and then the description of going under one year and going over the next year, but always going back to the same baseline, for how long is that the baseline? Like, it doesn't incrementally increase every year?
Your baseline would only increase by the QB wages or utilities. It would increase if staff come forward with an ongoing request, like a new staff person is hired, or there's another pump station or lift station built and there's additional maintenance costs associated with that. So those kind of things would drive an increase in your base budget. If it's a one-time request for an activity or an operational activity, for example, a $20,000, that would only be in there 1 year and you'd go back to your base budget. So your base budget can go up and down. It can go down because council says, I'd like some reductions in your base budget. Things are tight. We need to have a 10% reduction. I'm not sure where you're going to get them, staff, but you need to come forward with recommendations. When staff would come forward with those recommendations, they would be attached to that justification would be the consequence of reducing that budget. What happens to the existing service level if you reduce this budget? What, maybe we're not allowed, if you want to take $20,000 out of this pump maintenance budget, that means I'm not going to be able to maintain the pumps at the service level that we think is the best to keep the most reliable operation. So your base budget will move around, but it's only going to move depending on what staff bring forward as requests.
So what about, like we were talking about earlier, small but yearly and consistent increases in just cost of supplies and cost of product? Like, how long is your base budget meant to absorb that until it just can't absorb it anymore?
Well, I think that information would come from when you're looking at the surpluses on the bottom line. How much are you putting into reserve at the end of the year from your base budget? If you're putting $260,000, $250,000 a year into your reserve out of your base budget, you've definitely got some operational surplus in there. which is needed in an operating budget, because you never know what type of things are going to break, what type of additional repair work or capital replacement might be required because something fails.
So then it's just a whole different way of, I mean, you're paying attention to different things than we were paying attention to previously, basically. So if we are then meant to be managing whether or not our budget can continue to absorb regular yearly increases, and now we're looking at that based on what you just described, the reserves, for example. It's kind of rhetorical, but who's paying attention to that? Because we're all paying attention to it, but when everybody's paying attention to it, then maybe no one's paying attention to it. So does that mean that we need to start going into our reserves perhaps and putting like minimum limits so that because that might take like 5, 6, 7, 8 years to get to that point where we're now dipping too low, where now the budget can no longer absorb where it's got itself to. None of us might be here. None of them might be here. Like who decides that we've gone too far and we now need to permanently, bring up the base budget to be at a level that's compatible with 2030 prices or 2035 costs.
I'll just comment on that, then I'll pass it over to Councillor Mattis. My expectation personally is that the Chief Financial Officer is ultimately responsible for reviewing what the budget is, what the surplus in the budget is, what's going into reserve. The Director of Operations is going to be responsible because he's going to see the ebb and flow of maintenance and repair work and be able to come and say, hold on here. If you ask the Director of Operations, and I can ask the Director of Operations, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but having been an operational person before, there's always an ebb and flow to maintenance and repair and replacement. Some things happen one year and they don't happen the next year. The ultimate responsibility is going to stand with the CFO, who's going to need to bring reports to us, which they do on a quarterly basis, and it's our responsibility to review and understand and ask those questions when they come here. Councillor Mattis?
To answer further for Councillor Van der Meulen, our biggest barometer will probably be the status of our reserves. As you said, if our reserves, if they come to us and we have capital projects, because our operational surpluses flow into capital reserves. So if we have insufficient capital reserves in order to carry out the projects that we want, then that means we need to drive more operational money to go into those reserves. So, and again, that falls on the CFO to, just as he did today in sewer, said, hey, if at the rate that we're going, we may have to borrow money. Well, if that's the case, then the council of the day, maybe this council or the next council, would then look at the base budget and say, we need to increase the base budget in order to drive more money into those reserves so that we can fund our capital projects.
Right.
Okay, so that's your barometer. Is can you, and as the assistant CFO said, we don't need to necessarily borrow money if we move projects out, knowing that we do have to do those projects. So we can fund them as we go, but if we reach a point where the fund gets so small, then you're going to have to look at your base budget to fix that problem. So that's your big barometer.
So that's what I thought, which is a different way of looking at things than we've looked at them before. Or we're paying more attention to a different portion of the budget than we were before. So that's why I ask then, does that mean that we should be going, at least in our significant reserves, and putting a minimum on there? Because we all know that different people have different philosophies on reserves. Some people think they're great, some people think they're not. Some people build them up, some people raid them. And so if that's what we're paying attention to, should we not have minimums, at least on some of the very critical reserves?
I would ask the CFO to comment on that, because I think we did go through our reserves and set some limits on our reserves, and I can't remember 100% if we came to a resolution on those numbers.
Wow, what a good idea, Petra.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, we did discussed them. I'm just trying to remember the timing on this. I think it was about a year ago, something to that. And there was no resolve. I brought forward a policy at that time, and at that time, council, it was quite an encompassing review of the reserves. We spoke about minimum balances. We spoke about consolidating some reserves. We actually consolidated 2 reserves into one, into the sewer capital reserve. One was the lagoon reserve, and I can't remember, a pump reserve, I think, pump contingency. When I brought up the water reserve, that all, everybody stopped, and so we didn't go any further. That policy is still out there. I haven't brought it back to council. Quite frankly, at that point in time, there didn't seem to be a large appetite for that, but it's certainly, it's still there. You can certainly resurrect it and bring it back.
Councillor Mattis?
For me, the difficulty in setting minimum reserves is that's kind of like in your house saying a minimum bank account. The reality is sometimes you need to go below the minimum, and no matter where we set the reserve, the council of the day can change it based on their needs and requirements. Because there's going to be times when something needs to be done and you'll run your reserve to zero or into the negative. You actually have to borrow because it has to be done. So to set a minimum is, I would not favor that.
i.e. the Gallagher Lake siphon.
Councillor Michelle?
Except for, excuse me, except for if you, and we're going to have a discussion on reserves, because that's part of a lot of what my notes are, because I've always had the view that you want to have a healthy reserve, but what's the point of keeping your reserves at millions of dollars and then borrowing money? I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me as a business person. I would never do that with my business, and a successful business person is successful because he has that philosophy. I mean, you don't borrow money if you have your own money. You know, you got to keep a minimum balance in there so that if there's an emergency, you can deal with that. But it doesn't make sense to me to be borrowing millions and millions of dollars and having $2 million in your reserve account. You know, you have to have, I guess we have to establish as a council what is the reserve really for? It should be for emergencies. You know, capital projects, if you've got your own money, then do them. Another problem with having large reserve accounts is that government will view you as an organization as somebody that doesn't really need their money. You know, I mean, you go to government and say, okay, we've got a $1.5 million project that we'd like to do, and we want to apply for grants or whatever. And they look at your financials and they say, well, you've got $2 million in reserves. Why are you asking us for any money? I think you got to be really careful in having, we need reserves, but they should be there for emergencies. So we have to establish what is a healthy reserve to have. There's no point in having reserves to pay for capital projects, and then when you do the capital projects, you borrow. I mean, why did you build up the reserves for those projects in the first place? I mean, you tell your users that you need to have increases to build up reserves for a capital project that's coming down the road, and then you leave it in a reserve account and you go and borrow the money. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. We've got to have a real good discussion of how we're handling that. I think there's too much money in the water fund reserve. We need to spend more of that money so that we're not borrowing as much. There's always a difference, and I know Doug's going to say, well, interest rates are really low now, and you know, there's always a spread. I mean, they don't give you as much as they charge you no matter what. I mean, you go to any bank and trying to get a term deposit and find out how much you actually have to pay for interest if you need to borrow money. There's always a spread. That's how banks make money. That's how the financial world revolves. So I think we have to determine what is a healthy reserve and what we want our reserves to be for. And, you know, not just create reserves for projects and then when we do the projects, borrow. I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me.
Reserves also smooth the cash flow. You have to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, they shouldn't be used for that. Reserves should be used for reserves. Reserves, their definition is as an organization, you want to have a reserve, so if you have an emergency, you can tap into that reserve without having to have huge increases for your users. I mean, why would you want to?
In our situation, we collect taxes once a year, so we put money in reserve to pay our bills for the rest of the year until we collect taxes the next year. It smooths your cash flow.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about, I don't know if that's what we're using our reserves for. That's a good question to the staff. Are we using our reserves to smooth our cash flow?
Indirectly. Sorry. In a very indirect way, yes.
Yeah.
Right? It's
But
like
you
it's,
tap-
we hold I think we have about $8 million in between statutory and non-statutory reserves, which are surplus, right? And so that money is definitely used throughout the year. Like you said, we're using this year's tax money to pay our bills for this year. And don't forget, we bill our taxes for June 30th, right? So therefore, we're really 6 months behind the scene. And so on a cyclical basis, come tax time in May or June, we really should be pretty well running low on our cash flow at that point in time. But what indirectly, as I refer to, is we will use some of that surplus cash to help us through the year. Or reserve funds, right? So,
Well, but those reserves are built up because you get the influx of money when you collect all your taxes. So obviously, they're not going to just sit there, they're sitting there in a reserve.
Yep.
But that's a different
Yep.
reserve account than what I would view the water capital reserve account, because that's actual money for projects,
Yep.
you know, and for debt. It's not your operating. I understand exactly that you would smooth that out, and that would make sense.
Thanks, Councillor Michelle. Councillor Schwarzenberger?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just looking at the Water Capital Reserve Fund, we do seem to be doing what Councillor Michelle is suggesting, because the end of 2021, we should have a hair over 2 million, and at the end of 2025, we have a hair over 1 million. So we're depleting it over 5 or 4 years by $1 million to obviously pay for some of the capital projects that we have. So, I mean, the discussion can be, is $1 million, should it be less than $1 million? But we are doing what Councillor Michelle is suggesting. That's on page 37.
Yeah. Yeah, it shows that the only thing we're borrowing for is the Gallagher Lake siphon, and we're spending about $4.5 million in projects funded out of reserve, if I'm reading that correctly.
That's correct, and for the Gallagher project, the philosophy behind borrowing is it's going to benefit the residents well into the future. So it's kind of pushing those costs off into the future for the future residents.
Thank you. Councillor Mattis?
Well, I'm not sure where we're at in terms of the discussion here, if we're still on operations or whether I have questions regarding the water capital projects, but I don't know whether other councillors still want to, whether their questions are resolved regarding base budgets and the budget that would become the base budget for operating. If not, then I'll jump in on capital.
I would jump in on the capital for now, and if something comes up, we can always jump back.
Okay. The Station Street Water Main Upgrades Phase 2, through to the director, that 160,000, is that the total budget, or is that just engineering?
That's the whole budget. That's
Okay.
to replace or upgrade the water main along
Okay.
there for the Phase 2 of Station Street.
The analysis of the canal covering piping section, I know I brought up that concept at one point with yourself and our engineer. For myself, I would not consider investigating covering the existing canal, because that would not eliminate maintenance of that canal. We'd still have what we have underneath the cover. So for myself, I wouldn't look at that. The 20,000 that you've asked for there, is that a stab in the dark, or is that based on something?
No, that's more of a stab in the dark. And the reason why I put covering too, because just to give council some options, and I talked to Councillor Michelle as well about, maybe we really need to start looking at maybe starting at the south end where the pipe or the canal's smaller and putting it into pipe or covering it, which helps us with algae issues.
For the rest of council, this came about when we were talking about Gallagher Lake, and I threw out the idea of, instead of spending money on shotcreting every year, why are we not looking at putting pipe? We have a ditch already that we can lay a pipe in the bottom of. And at that point, the engineer said, well, yeah, actually, I think it was from Road 3 onward, that basically we could go with a 3-foot pipe. And I thought, well, if that's the same cost as doing shotcrete, why are we not putting a pipe in the ground and covering it up?
Well,
Or if it's similar, and that's why the investigation to find out.
And that's what we want to explore, and it will be a lot more.
Yeah, a lot more.
But, and so I want to work with the engineers, and I'll show them our figures, what because they're not involved with the restoration, it's all staff.
Yeah.
We run that. And then looking at covering, and then looking at piping. You're looking at a few different options, and then coming to council and saying, okay, if we're going to spend I'll just pick a number, $150,000 this year, do you want to do 100 meters of pipe or 200 meters of pipe or whatever it is, or do you want to restore 300 meters of the concrete canal? Like, there'd be some options there to look at.
Further down, the hillside street looping, is that the actual work or just the engineering, the 25,000?
No, that's the actual work.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a huge project.
The last one that I worked on, or that I looked at, was, it's a future project. It's a northwest sector water, the town's contribution. And I thought, rather than clouding the issue and having that in our longer-term capital budget, I think it should be deleted until we are actually approached by the owners and determine what their contribution is before we continually put it into the roadmap for something that won't happen until we're approached by the owners that they want to move forward. That was just my thoughts. That's on page 41 of 44, if anybody's wondering.
And for that northwest sector, and what we're doing for that on the sewer side, we are upgrading Station Street Phase 2 with sewer, sizing it up for the future. Yeah, but I don't disagree with you, because I don't think all the homeowners will be on board anytime soon. And that could get moved or moved out.
Yeah, I mean, if the owners come forward at that time and say they want to develop that project north of Lions Park, then it comes back into our capital budget. But, it's not that it's a huge number, but it's a piece of the capital that, if it isn't there, it makes our capital look better.
Yeah, we haven't heard anything in the last year with that. I don't think the CAO has been approached.
Through the chair, no, I have not been.
So I would, if the motion is required, I would make the motion that the Northwest Sector Water Town's contribution be deleted from the Capital Works long-term budget.
I'll second.
Any further discussion on that motion? Councilor Michelle, any further discussion?
No.
Okay, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried.
And that was it for my questions on capital. Actually, I did have one more, if I may
Sure.
jump
Sure.
back in again. On the Sawmill Road extension and Station Street upgrade, I see we're putting $12,000, and I'm assuming that's for engineering. When I look at drawings below, like, I'm wondering, why do we need more engineering on a project that's already been engineered and the construction's already started? I'm just wondering why we require more engineering. When I read this, it's like final touches. And I'm just wondering what that engineering's buying us. Again, is that just a portion of the cost that's been allocated? Have we not already done that engineering? When I look at the picture, I would assume that we have.
For Sawmill Extension?
Yeah,
and-
Sawmill Road Extension and Station Street Upgrade, page 41 of 44. Yes,
I believe the CAO.
CAO
would
wants to answer the question.
CAO?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through the chair, during strategic planning, council looked at this and asked for some additional reviewing and redesign of this, so that is why it's in here.
Okay. That answers that.
Thank you.
Yeah, not all the details have been hammered out yet. They still need to do more work on it.
I have a question. I don't really know what my question is, but it has to do with water meters. I feel like I should be asking a question about water meters. Wondering if there's any way that we can get away from water meters, which I'm sure the answer is no. There's probably some things attached to having water meters that are important.
Not anymore.
But if I was going to ask a question quickly, it was just around it's a 5-year program. Are we going to have changed out all our water meters? And then I'll pass it over to the CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. Water meters came in when we received funding, grant funding, that was part of the ability to do twinning. So that's why we have water meters. And I do not believe that we have the option of removing them at this point in time. With respect to the change out, it would be a 5-year program, and currently right now staff are looking at how this should be completed, and we will be bringing back some information to council in the near future with options for having the change outs done.
Thank you, Councillor Michelle.
I believe that we should be looking into, have staff look into if there was any actually binding, I don't believe there was. I believe that we've now done the projects, and if we decided we didn't want to meter water anymore, we wouldn't do it. I look at those numbers and how much we have to spend on, I saw that it was $130,000 per year for replacement. You know, plus, if we look at what, if you were to look at what water metering has cost this town to the water fund, it's atrocious. Just in having all of the, you know, the extra people we've had to hire, all of the equipment, and now these meters are failing, we have to replace them on an annual basis. I think it's a serious question that we need to look at. I agree with your worship. I think we should look into that.
Make a
If-
motion.
You know, I don't know the answer to that question. Is there somewhere that they would come back and take the money from us if we decided all of a sudden? I don't think so. I don't believe so, you know. I would move that we have staff investigate the implications of the town making a decision to remove water meters.
Not necessarily remove, but certainly stop using.
Yeah, anyway, I think it's a discussion that needs to be had. It's just getting atrociously expensive to maintain this metering concept. So unless there was some provision in there from government that said you can't, in the future, you can't, you know, opt out of meters, then I think it's a discussion we need to have. But we need that answer. We need an answer to that question, not just saying, "Oh, I don't think we can." Is there something that was tied into the money that we received from government that said in the future you can't opt out? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but I think we should find out the answer.
No, that makes me, like, I don't have that's why I say I don't have a question, but I feel like I should be asking a question. We're not the only ones struggling with this as well. I'll pass it over to Director of Operations.
Yeah, you can debate both sides. The positives with water meters is it makes people accountable for their water usage. So stepping back from that, then you go back to the old system where you see the greenest grass areas and, you know, unlimited uses, and what that does is it taxes your overall water system a little faster over time. And you may need to size as you grow as a community, you may need to size your infrastructure up in certain areas just to keep up with the demand. So there, I can see the other side of it too, because sometimes I wonder about it. I don't know if we are tied to it. We were tied to it on that particular project. They wouldn't give us the funding unless we put water meters in, so we did, and it's been 10 years pretty much now. But I think it's helped us reduce the overall water usage per capita compared to what where we were 10 years ago.
Just one sec, Councillor Michelle. Councillor Mattis.
That, I think, would come out in the report. I'd like to know if, what our population and gallons per person were at that time versus population gallons per person now. Like, that should all be in that report that we're asking for. Could we get that motion read back to us, please?
The motion that I have on the table is that council direct staff on the implications to the town on removing water meters.
I'll second that motion.
CFO.
I'd just like to add, it is quite a comprehensive, I'm not disagreeing with anything that's said here. I've come from communities with flat rates, I've come from communities with meters, and so it's, everybody has their own vision on it. I really do think it's a comprehensive report, however, when you're looking at items such as climate change and the effect of the Okanagan Basin Water Board, groundwater impact, et cetera. So I think it's a lot bigger than what I envision. And I don't know if we have the expertise here, and I'm kind of going, probably you should be reaching out to somebody who has that expertise to prepare such a report. I can certainly prepare consumption reports, that's not an issue, but the impact on the overall well-being of the green economy, where it puts the economic benefits, various spin-offs for the town of Oliver and area, I don't know.
Councillor Michelle.
There are other ways of doing that. I think that if we get this report, at least we'll have something to look at concrete, because I'm really looking at the numbers, and it's costing us as a town and our taxpayers a lot of money. There are other ways. I mean, you can have restrictions or odd even. There's all kinds of ways to reduce water usage, not just meters. I mean, there's a lot of innovative ways. I mean, you can force people not to use water every day. I mean, you simply say, like I say, odd even or whatever. In the summer, when you're faced with situations where there's droughts, they come up with further restrictions, and those are not really tied to meters. They're just restrictions. So there's other ways to, in the rural area, the discussion has quite often come up as well, we should be metering farm irrigation water, but they in effect are regulated because they have flow controls. So you're allowed 10 gallons per minute, per acre, so you can't use more than that water. And most farmers, there's maybe the odd farmer that over-irrigates because he's not well-educated, but most farmers understand that if you over-irrigate, you actually damage your trees. I mean, and they are limited. They're limited through those flow controls. I mean, if we'd ever gone down that path, and I always argued against it, that it would be a horrendous cost. I mean, in the millions and millions of dollars, and once again, 10 years or 5 years later, you're replacing those meters. And this cost is becoming burdensome to the town. So I think it's high time we looked at this.
Councillor Mattis.
Thank you, Your Worship. As part of that, I would, with your comparatives on flows and consumption, past versus present and projections, that we could probably make some speculative guesses as to what the increased cost would be for, if we didn't have the meters and the consumption went back to what it used to be. What is our increased pumping cost? What is our increased maintenance cost? And that would give us a little bit more comparison versus the cost that we have for replacing meters. And, I don't know how in-depth you can go or how speculative you could be on this, but, anything you can give us would be helpful.
Yeah.
Just one sec, Councillor Schwarzenberger. I did have the question that I haven't heard an answer to yet. After 5 years, will we have replaced all the meters? Or what percentage of meters or is that program 130 off into the distance?
So we're going to be looking at that soon. Right now, Rob, our utility clerk, is replacing meters as on a reactive basis. So if a meter breaks, he goes out. If there's no consumption showing, he'll go out and replace those meters. He's only one person, so it's going to take a while. I plan on sitting down soon to kind of hash out how long that might take, and if that $130,000 might be reduced in the near future if we can get a lot of these meters replaced. So that's something I can come back to you with, but right now I couldn't even give you an estimate. It's kind of just being done on a reactive basis, and it's costing us about $130,000 a year in inventory. Yeah.
Just one sec, Councilor Michelle. Councilor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not opposed to getting a report, for sure, but I think that there are many people in the community who have made decisions to halt their water or lower their water consumption with xeriscaping and all sorts of things that have invested in that because they wanted to lower their water usage. So I think for us to turn around in the middle or 5 years into it or 10 years into it or whatever it is and say, nah, we're not going to do that anymore. And too bad for the money you spent on trying to reduce your personal water consumption. I'm not sure if that's the right way to go.
Thank you, Councilor Schwarzenberger. Councilor Michelle.
After what Sean, the director, just said, that, you know, I think that we might find this is like a snowball. I also thought that 130 was a plan to replace an X number of meters, and at the end of 5 years or whatever, that they would be all replaced. But the answer just came that that's just basically for the ones that fail or are not using it. You know, to me, it's like you've put all these meters in. We're starting to get some that are doing this, so that snowball is going to grow. Maybe it's too conservative. You know, we might find 2 years from now or 3 years from now or 4 years from now that we're spending $200,000 or $300,000 to replace these meters because they're all going to start to fail. I mean, nothing lasts, you know, forever. So I think it's timely that we get this report. I really do. I think that we have to be able to look at that. And I agree with Councillor Schwarzenberger. The most effective way is to meter. But as a municipality, if you financially start to look at it, and it becomes burdensome, and it, you know, I mean, at some point you have to make a decision on it.
Councilor Ventimiglia.
Thank you. Much like Councillor Schwarzenberger, I'm not opposed to getting information, but my initial reaction to the conversation is that removing water meters feels like taking a step back in time. For you know, a lot of the reasons mentioned, there's the actual cost that we pay every year, but the flip side of that is the cost to the environment, basically, and to our long-term water supply if we're not regulating it somehow, and right now we're regulating it through charging for it. So I'm definitely not opposed to information. I think the 130,000 annually, who knows? Water meters 5 years ago were much different than water meters today. I think they've already changed quite a bit. There's already 100% not a water meter expert, but I remember seeing different water meters, and the original ones had all these moving pieces and the newer ones don't, and they're meant to last longer. So that might not be a forever and forever ongoing expense. There'll always be an expense, but I think that the flip side of that is that there will be, you know, an environmental expense, and there's different things to weigh out. I just think, again, I'm not opposed to information, but my initial reaction is that feels like taking a huge step back in time to go and remove a bunch of water meters or stop using them after the decision was made to go that way. And we got people used to paying for water that they use and using water according to that.
Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Worship. Through to, I guess, Director of Operations, are the water meters that we're using to replace the old ones, are these proven to have a lower failure rate, or are we only going to get 5 or 10 years out of these new ones as well?
Well, finance looks after the water meters now. But from what I know, that the newer ones, they were finding what they estimated the battery life to be in the register heads. Originally, the original ones that we put in were supposed to last X amount of years, and they're finding they've been less than that. But the deputy finance manager could answer that.
Yeah, they were supposed to last 20 years, but we're finding that it's about 10, and it's the batteries that are failing. And just to add to the conversation, right now, the utility clerk is changing out about 400 a year, and we have about 2,600 meters. So if you do the math, it's about 6.5 years at that rate. The new ones should have a longer battery life, but only time will tell.
So it almost seems like if we're doing 400 a year and they're only lasting 5 years, we're just going to be doing that in perpetuity.
Potentially, yes.
Thank you.
There will be a perpetuity number, we don't know what it is.
Supposed to.
It's definitely worth further conversation.
Sorry for opening this can of worms. But I also know the other wrinkle in this thing is the less water you sell, the more
Expensive
you need
it
to raise the price up to be able to cover your costs of your utilities. So it seems like there's a few things running into each other here, and I'm sure we're not the only council that's asking questions about this. And as a small municipality, some bigger municipalities are looking at millions and millions and millions of dollars with these meters. So I don't know what a report, some preliminary information from the CFO would probably be a good place to start, and that may, I agree, if we need to get or want further information, we're probably going to have to look at some kind of a consultant to get involved. And I suspect there already has been reports generated for other municipalities that have looked at this issue exactly. And it'd be good to know how much water we're selling today compared to what we were selling before, because we are in the business of selling water, which is getting more expensive. Yeah, it's a challenging discussion for sure. Councillor Michelle.
I agree with your worship. I think I've made that point before, that, you know, if you drive consumption way down, then you have to increase the cost per cubic meter, just because you need that revenue as an organization. We need that revenue drives our budget. I think the real question that needs to be answered is, are we tied in somehow, to that funding that we received? Somehow we need an accurate answer to that. Because there's no point in going down the road and doing anything if somehow we tied ourselves in. So I think hopefully the CAO can somehow, I don't know how we're going to get that answer, but are we tied in from all those grant funds that we received?
You go back to the original paperwork.
Yeah, I think we need that. I'd like an answer to that, you know what I mean? Before we even proceed going down, if we're tied in, well, then why even spend time wasting staff time and hiring consultants or whatever?
Thank you, Chair. And I totally agree with you. That's obviously the first place to start, is just to go into those agreements. As part is moving forward, though, also, one of the things I was thinking about as I'm sitting here, a lot of provincial grants and federal grants are really tied into water conservation. So if you're trying to get any grants in the future, like I know we're dealing with the past, but if you're trying to get any grants in the future for projects, you might want to keep that in mind. I'm not saying, we still have to do this analysis, but I know for a fact it's like the life cycle costs when you're trying for roads and various infrastructure. They want to know the life cycle costs. What are you, same with regional growth strategies. Certain criteria, if you don't meet those criteria, they just say you can't apply. So that's another thing you have to be aware of.
Councillor Shudu.
Thank you. I just had a quick question. Do we know the exact amount of the grant for the meters that we received?
Around 8 million.
Million?
Millions of dollars.
5 million at least, I think, or more.
8 million for the 20.
I can't give you the exact amount, but I know it was for phase 2 of the water twinning that was undertaken, and also, phase 2.
Yeah, it was put in during phase 2 of the water twinning, but then it also evolved in order to do the the other phases after that, we
Yeah.
had to have that in place. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it was, I can't remember. It was many millions of dollars, so
Yeah,
altogether.
because I'm just wondering at which point is this going to start costing the town more money than, than we actually spent on it, so.
Yeah, but there are some offset costs too. So if you take the water, like I said before, and I'm not arguing either way, but the positive sides of water meters are generally people use less water. So less pumping, less electricity, generally less maintenance. You're prolonging your infrastructure sizing. You're also prolonging like your aquifers, like our groundwater. Sometimes, in many municipalities, your aquifers after a while start decreasing. So anytime that you're pulling out less water, it's always helpful too. So those are the positive sides, but I see the negative sides too, and it is a lot of money. And so you can make arguments both ways. Yeah.
Do we have a motion that's moved and second? What,
I can't project
Can
it.
you read it back again?
One more time.
Do you want me to read it?
Yes,
Mayor
please.
Johans? We did a little wordsmithing.
That's fine.
That council directs staff to provide information on the implications of discontinuing the use of water meters.
Councilor Ventimiglia?
To the point made by Councillor Michelle, I don't know if that's,
If you can speak into the mic.
I need one of those that clips to my shirt. To the point made by Councillor Michelle, if this is what it means, then that's great. But really, the question is it even possible to remove water meters, or are we tied in because of the funding received? Because if depending on that answer, that indicates whether you're going to move forward on any other
That'll be the first information.
investigations or not. So I don't think that's what it said, unless that's what it meant.
That would be part of the report. That was the first question that was asked with regards to that, whether or not it was tied to the funding, and can we discontinue it?
That's the question.
If the answer is yes, the report will be very short.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think it's good to get some more information and ask those questions. I see the value of meters and water conservation and all those things as well, but at some point you just got to start to wonder, is there maybe a different way or a better way or to do this? I don't know that answer. I'm sure, like I said, other municipalities are struggling with the same thing and spending millions of dollars replacing water meters, as we aren't the only ones being affected by this. So I guess that'd be a good place to start and get a little bit of information, and we can go from there. It'd be good to understand I see the pros of it as well, but what are the additional cons? Might not be able to get grant funding because we're not doing what's needed for conservation, and we wouldn't want to sort of cut ourselves off at the knees trying to save a few bucks and not be able to get grant funding. So I'd be in favor of the motion. We get that little bit of information, and we'll go from there. Any further discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Any other questions about the budget? Councillor Michelle?
Under capital, the 7D drainage. Yeah. Sean's smiling and he's nodding because he knows exactly. I mean,
You want to buy it? It's for sale.
yeah, I don't want to buy it, but the long-term fix is 5.5 or $550,000, but I think we have to be able to get that from the users. I mean, we're not tied into, nobody, I don't think our other users are going to be paying for that because the benefit is for those properties. So I don't know, have we even approached the property owners? And I guess we have, somebody's laughing over there because every year.
We've approached property owners over the years, and it's going to be a difficult project any way you look at it. We don't have right-of-ways in place for most of the pipe. We inherited this when we took over from Solid. It does benefit only a certain amount of properties. It's in our water system, but it has nothing to do with water. It's just the drainage system. And it helps these properties from slowly flooding every year from natural groundwater. So we try to do the bare minimum each year, because if we do too much work, then we hear it that way too from those property owners, that it's costing them too much money. And I've said this before, many years ago, that right from the start, when this drainage system was put in, there should have been an extra amount of dollars put aside for future replacement. When you put in a drainage system, it generally needs to be replaced after 10 to 20 years in order to work properly. It's way beyond that. It's still working. We're still making it work. Not all property owners are easily approachable.
I guess the real question, Your Worship, is the town legally obligated to continue to maintain that system? And through that obligation, do we have the mechanism to be able to charge them for it? I mean, that's really the question.
Mm-hmm.
What's the legal consequences of that whole drainage that's happening down there?
CEO.
Thank you, Your Worship. This question has been asked before, and the answer that we have received is it's part of it was included in the letters patent for Solid, and it is something that we cannot walk away from. We are responsible for it, and the costs are there. So we cannot remove this as a service. We have tried.
And the second part of that question, in that responsibility that we have the ability to charge the property owners for doing the work, correct or incorrect?
That's correct,
Okay, so,
because it is a service that is provided, so we have the ability to charge for the service provided.
to the benefiting properties,
Yes.
okay.
And there was, I do believe that was the direction of council many years ago, that any costs incurred for that be borne by those
Yeah.
individuals.
That's correct, and that's what we've been doing the last few years.
Since I've been here.
Yeah, so, and some years are heavier than others, like we've just did some upgrades to the pump because it's never been replaced, and some electrical upgrades that haven't been replaced since day one. But yeah, it's aging, and something has to be done in the near future with that. And it would be a huge cost. I'm trying to remember how many properties are involved, but there's maybe a dozen properties, and to pay, whether it's 600 or 700,000 or more by, when you need to replace it, that's a huge burden on those properties too. So maybe there are some grants available or something that we can find in the meantime to help that situation.
CEO.
Thank you, Your Worship. One thing I did want to indicate is for the drainage, when we usually look at the prior year's budget amounts, and that's what we tax for the following year.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just curious what the lifespan of the $95,000 repair would be versus the lifespan of the $550,000 full upgrade.
That's just rerouting.
The $95,000 was to, if needed, to redirect the pipe that goes to the Oxbow. Right now, we don't have a right-of-way over a particular property that receives no benefit.
I see. Thank you.
Councillor Schwarzenberger.
No, my question was answered, thank you.
Okay. CEO?
Thank you. One more thing that I should provide all of council information with is that 2 years ago, I do believe that we have been attempting, over 2 years ago, attempted to try to get statutory right-of-ways along it so that we did have the ability to go in and do any repairs. And we have been told by numerous property owners that they will not sign off on any of the paperwork to allow us that statutory right-of-way. And we can't just take it.
Are those property owners benefiting from the system?
Yes.
So we
And
almost
there's
need a
a-
legal opinion, what our obligations are if they won't allow us.
That's right.
Like, how can we maintain a system that we're obligated to maintain if they won't allow us to maintain the system for their benefit? We almost need a legal opinion.
That might be our way out.
Yeah.
Then they can look after it.
No, I would agree. That was the thing that popped into my mind, just to know what our options are moving forward if we have a system that's failing and that we can go in there and do what's needed to repair it.
What's our legal
What are our rights in there, and what is the trigger points that we're able to walk away from it? Councillor
I would
Michelle?
suggest, and I don't think we need a motion, but that staff should investigate through our legal advisories, because it makes no sense if they're benefiting. I mean, orchard land right now in Oliver is almost $200,000 an acre. Without that drainage system, some of those places are worthless. I mean, what's the benefit is really to those property owners, and they have to understand that, eh? I mean, that'll build up with water in there if there's no drainage system in there. So, I mean, we need a legal opinion. I agree with that. We can't be forced to maintain something that even the actual property owners don't want us on their property. I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
Wrote it down.
She's made notes.
Good. Find out if we can get out of this damn. And I don't want it, Doug.
Move the budget.
Oh, you weren't listening?
No? Any more questions? Move the budget.
No more questions on the budget per se, but I think we need to have a discussion because it does impact our budget. The recent announcement that the government made with that 1.5 whatever million dollars, and how that money is going to be apportioned. Because
That was asked about the sewer before you got here as well, and it would apply equally to the water.
yeah. So, what was the answer on the sewer?
They'll get back to you.
Huh?
Not enough detail yet, they'll get back to us.
But it's going to have an impact on our budget, so I think we need to have an answer to that before we pass this budget. I can't vote on this budget unless I know how much money is going to be transferred to the water fund from that money.
From the little bit we know, it will be equivalent to what we gave up by not increasing our fees. Like when we
The shortfall.
lowered our fees last year, and that cost us $300,000.
Yeah.
Then we would get that $300,000 reimbursed, which would then go into our reserves, because that's where it would have flowed to in the first place, because we had enough operationally to run. What we suffered in was reserves last year, so that's where it would go. So it really has no effect on the budget.
Well, I think we should probably look at maybe analyzing that a little closer, because the water fund, we have to have some kind of a formula as to how that money is attributed to the different funds. Because, I mean, if the water fund is expected to pay, whatever it is, 40% on a lot of the, towards the buildings, towards staff salaries, and then when there's money flowing back, they don't get the percentages. That doesn't make sense.
But the money that's flowing back to this point is that it's flowing back to cover expenses or losses. It's not just a check. You actually have to almost provide, as a result of the pandemic, we lowered our water rates, and that cost us $300,000. So we would like to be reimbursed at $300,000. That's how the system's working. So it looks really good when they say $1.5 million, but we probably won't be eligible for nearly that amount at the end of the day. But the government looks good in the process.
Oh,
It's only covering what it cost us.
Okay, so through to the CFO, that announcement then, we have to prove that we had those losses to get that money? Like, it was no carte blanche? I understood,
No,
I understood the announcement
no.
was that we were going to get 1.59 or
No,
whatever.
that was what the thinking was when the announcement first came out, but then there was quite a
Fine
bit of
print.
criteria associated with that.
Okay.
And it's loss in revenue and extra bylaw expenses as extra RCMP expenses. So anything that is expensed out, and it is expensed out over a period of time because this pandemic is not over yet, can come out of there. But we have to report on it every year and why it was expensed.
I see. So in other words, they will transfer the $1.5 million, and then you're not allowed to pull money out of that unless you prove you had those losses? Or are they only going to give you what you prove?
Only give you what you prove up to.
Up front,
Yes.
Up to 1.5.
up to 1.5?
Yes.
Okay. So with water and sewer, it was easy. We made those decisions, hard, concrete decisions.
True.
How are you going to get more money?
Well, there'll be other costs that we did for COVID for water
Yeah,
and sewer as
bylaw,
well.
yeah, but those are
There's a
minimal
whole bunch
compared
of things.
to.
Those are not big numbers, but it's all still numbers.
So potentially that announcement that they made for the town could be a lot smaller if we can't prove that we had a 1.5.
It's not going to be potential, it's for.
It's going to be, okay. Well, I guess in retrospect, your worship, that it, if that's the criteria that they're putting there, then that decision that we made last spring, we're going to get that money. And that's a real bonus. Yeah. But I was actually more concerned if we were going to get the actual 1.5 as to how we divvy that up, but we're not going to get that. We're going to get what we lost. That's fine. That answers that question. But we need, that number needs to be in our budget. In this budget. I mean, if we know that they're going to give us that money.
It'll flow through into
This was-
reserves at some point, maybe next year by the time we get it.
Councillor Grace?
I don't know if I have a question anymore because this is new information. Like, I thought this was a guaranteed grant, but we had to distribute it based on the criteria. So I think there needs to be a larger conversation then as to how this is going to be spent without assumptions that it's going to go to specific areas. I mean, there's other areas of the community, like Parks and Rec, for example, now have a huge revenue shortfall from last year that's going to need to come from somewhere. So I think there's a larger conversation here.
I think we had this item on the agenda yesterday as well, and the CFO will be coming back with a report on where those funds can be expensed or which ones will go where. Councillor Ventimiglia?
I was just going to read straight from our report from last night, where it said that the funding is intended to support local governments as we deal with increased operating costs and lower revenues due to COVID-19. Eligible costs will include addressing revenue shortfalls, facility reopening and operating costs, emergency planning and response costs, bylaw enforcement and protective services, computer and other electronic technology costs to improve interconnectivity and virtual communications, services for vulnerable persons, other related costs, and that the money will be there, but a schedule must be included in the audited financial statements identifying the amount of funds received and the use of those funds, as well as the year-end balance of these funds, and that will be required until they're fully drawn down. So I had the same thoughts that Councillor Grace had about some of our services that have suffered, losing user fees and things like that. If we can, Parks and Rec, theater perhaps, those sorts of things. But anyways, it's a big, they got 850,000 or something?
Yeah, the RDOS got 800,000, and I did have a conversation with Bill, a short conversation, but he identified that, that's a place where some funding could go, because that's some of the places that have had a loss in revenue. So getting into budget discussions this week, that'll be part of the questions that'll be asked.
Yeah, and for us, it's also things like we're going to have to, I think the CAO has already mentioned that we're going to have to make changes to our council chambers. That's not $1.5 million worth of changes, but we're going to have to move things around and upgrade. And yeah, exactly. All the expenses we've incurred because we're meeting virtually and, or we're meeting virtually, now we're meeting like this, the upgraded technology, all of those sorts of things.
No, that's great. But I guess it's always, the detail is always in the fine print, isn't it?
Devil is in the
I
details.
haven't seen all the fine print yet either.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they're still working on the fine print.
Are we at a point where someone can make a motion?
I'll jump in if no one else will. That council adopt the 2021 to 2025 water operating and capital financial plan as presented with a 4% rate increase, and that staff prepare the necessary bylaws.
I'll second.
Councillor Grace?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wondering if Doug has my number ready for me.
I'm sorry?
Just wondering what the per household cost.
Oh, I see, I knew you were going to
Sorry.
ask that. I was prepared, though. It's going to be, because the water is a little bit different than sewer, it's metered, but it'll be approximately, usually our water bills are approximately $300 annually, depending on the water usage. And so you can, 4%, that's about $12, so.
Thank you.
Our water bills are $300
Wait a minute, yeah.
annually?
Yeah, mine was
I
400.
pay a lot more than that. Anyways, that's another conversation.
Yeah,
That's,
high consumption.
I don't think, does that include the flat rate for the meter? The $300?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, it does, okay. Oh,
I was going to say mine's
Way.
north of that.
I have rocks,
Okay.
I have rock.
Good to know.
rocks and some grass.
I don't even look. So you like meters?
I'm pretty
No
sure
kidding.
just my last bill was more than that, and that's one bill out of 4 in a year. Good to know. Excellent.
Any further discussion, questions? I will call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Excellent.
Shortest water budget in 30 years.
No, good job.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, we used to go to 9 o'clock.
Usually longer than this. We
Yeah,
usually
I've
beat them
seen
up line by line.
What made it so different this year?
We didn't beat them up
We're
line by
still
line.
on.
We just
We're
said,
still live.
if you can live with this for the next 30 years, it's a good number.
So I just like took a second.
Back to the average water bill being $300.
Mayor, Mayor,
Your worship, we should move to adjourn.
Well, you wanted to stay here till 9, I thought.
No. Trust me, I don't.
Not so much.
I get a motion to adjourn.